morning. This is the most green you're getting out of me. I'm sorry, I'm a bitter German. I'm not much for St. Patrick. I don't hate him. I'm not Irish. I don't care. So, moving forward from our understanding of morality in general to understanding it in the sense of the virtues, both the cardinal virtues and the theological virtues, we move forward with looking at how to live all of this in the sense of being what we are, human persons, what that means, and especially in our interaction with others, our interactions, and even indeed with ourselves, to understand what it means to be this human person, and then how to be able to live towards that ultimate goal that we have in the morality. What's that ultimate goal? Happiness, ultimately eternal happiness. But ultimately, yes, all of this being directed towards our happiness. So what we are going to be looking at has been called in recent times, the theology of the body. To help understand that. Most of this was formulated by Pope John Paul II, St. John Paul II, in a series of speeches that he gave in the beginning of his papacy, late 70s, early 80s. Fleshed out in other ways, in other circles, but reflective of most of the understanding and tradition of Catholic morality concerning the body, in particular, of course, concerning matters of sexuality, what it means to express ourselves in this particular way. John Paul II highlights all of this because he sees a transition in recent times, not just his times, but even still true today. A transition in looking at and approaching these sorts of topics, these sorts of ideas, from something that is objective, deductive, and principled to something that is now more subjective, inductive, and experiential. So points to highlight. First of all, the rather traditional Catholic understanding is this is objective. That there is something real and outside of the particular reference. It is not dependent on the one who experiences this or defines this. There is the real beyond it, towards which one applies oneself to understand and appreciate and live it out. There is the deductive sense. There is that which is real and outside of one. One can derive their position based on certain principles, given principles and given positions. For example, the existence. There is a God that exists. There is a God who has revealed himself. Given those positions, what then can be formulated with regards to that? Principle. That it's formulated, it's found from principles, widely accepted truths from which conclusions can be drawn. that while this had been the case before in almost any sort of field, but in particular, of course, in matters of the body, it becomes instead, in recent times, in recent decades, in recent centuries, you could say, first of all, very subjective. So instead of having the real outside of an individual reference, it becomes real only if perceived, or based on how one perceives it. So the frame of reference isn't to something that is real and outside, but no, more into the one who is experiencing it. From being deductive from principles, it becomes inductive. Again, only things that come from what is experienced. Experiments, experience, maybe collective thought. And lastly, being experiential. There are no sort of widely accepted truths. It is only what is gained, only what is found or established from the experiences one has. So with that modern transition, has come at times the inability to appreciate what has been established in the divine order, in the plan of creation and the plan of salvation. Instead of reaching towards something that is above and beyond us, then it goes towards something just whatever it is we desire or we want. Whether it could be truth, whether it's pleasure, whatever it may be, becomes more of the focus. The focus turns, instead of us being outward towards the other, that everything becomes inward towards the self. What do I think? What do I experience? How do I see it? So a strong drive towards individualism. Away from being a part of the greater community, not just of the living, but even of the dead who have passed on what they know and understand. And of course, the foundations of this are laid out in many of the philosophers. For example, Descartes. What is Descartes' famous phrase? Anybody ever heard it? Pay attention in your philosophy classes. I think, therefore I am. What Descartes does in formulating this idea is not to postulate that there is something objective outside of himself, but to say it starts because I exist and I am thinking, I'm experiencing. Now, maybe those experiences are false. Descartes, you could say, preceded the idea of the Matrix before the Matrix movie was even made. Perhaps the experiences I am experiencing are false. Perhaps this isn't the world as it actually is, and I am somehow being deceived. However, I am still thinking. I am still reflecting, thinking, based on experiences. So, at a minimum, as a beginning, I must therefore exist. I do not know whether everything else outside of me exists, but I know I exist. So shifting the center of balance, as it were, from the outside to make it internal. And the greatest way this comes about is in much of the thoughts and ideas spread about throughout the 20th century, especially concerning humanity and its relationships with one another. Great movement of the 60s, of course, the free love, whatever it takes, in all those sorts of things. Bring these ideas to their full sort of conclusion. That all it's really about is what I experience. It's only about what I experience. Therefore, I desire to receive the most experiences that I can. And of course, what is the type of experience we want the most? That which is most pleasurable. Whatever gives us that feeling of pleasure, of satisfaction. Whether it's food, whether it's drink, whether it's drugs, whether it's sex. Instead of saying that all these things are oriented towards something more or real or more real. And no, it's just what do I want? What do I desire in all of this? So in tackling this more modern understanding of how to experience the world, how to even in a sense experience ourselves, John Paul II, trying to turn it back towards the full understanding of what we see as being the truth as revealed, as given to us in its principles, and then or can be deducted from that which is beyond ourselves in that understanding of Catholic truth. And this is very much something that is a reflection from the horrors of the 20th century. From one who experienced much of it firsthand, being born in Poland, living in Poland through World War II, struggling under Nazi rule, John Paul II very much understood many of these horrors, all the horrors of the wars. Modern warfare, which does far more damage in any type of category, physical, collateral, psychological, of course, experiencing the horror of discrimination in the particular form of the Holocaust, the planned extermination of various groups being seen as unfit, Jews, political prisoners, Christians, outright Christians, opposing Christians, homosexuals, those with mental defects or disabilities or disadvantages. And then, of course, what comes to be called the sexual revolution of the 60s. Supposedly only now have we found the understanding of what is truly to be desired. The pleasure or the satisfaction that comes out of that most basic act of any species: copulation and reproduction. So in looking at all of this, and experience all of this, seeing the full effects of these sorts of modern philosophical positions, trying to rehabilitate it and reorient it back towards where it should be. And in particular, concerning that which was most prominent in his day, in his time. Questions, topics concerning sexuality and the experience of the human person. It's always been seen that supposedly the Catholic Church is very prudish about these matters. But that's not the case in her rich history and her rich tradition and thought in all of these matters. These things are based on specific principles that may be deducted either directly from Revelation, as God directly reveals them, or from the basic things that are established in Revelation. Why, of course? Because the human heart desires to be satisfied in one way: in love. Humanity wants to love and to be loved. Now, as we've seen, there are various types of love. There are various ways of loving. But no matter which way, the human person wants to love, to be involved in love, in one way or another. Where modernity, John Paul II might say, where modernity fails is to see love as merely something that is experiential. And of course, only in the most experiential sense. But to say that no, love is far greater than just the experience that one has. There's something deeper, there's something more real there. In one of his other writings as Pope, he says, man cannot live without love. Man cannot live without love. He remains a being that is incomprehensible for himself. His life is senseless if love is not revealed to him. If he does not encounter love, if he does not experience it and make it his own, if he does not participate intimately in it. This is why Christ, the Redeemer, fully reveals man to himself. To ultimately go that the ultimate experience of love one can have as a human being is not one that is necessarily experienced or merely experienced. There can be some experience with it, but is one that is given to humanity. Given ultimately from the God who is love. as John writes in his first letter, his first epistle. So then, this theology of the body is concerned looking at the human quest for love in all of its forms. What were the types of love? What was one type of love we talked about? Philia. Which was? Remember what it was? Friendship. Kind of the common brotherhood of humanity. Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. That friendship that one establishes, that's a type of love. What's another one? Maybe you don't remember the term, but you might remember the idea.
Eros.
Eros, right, yes. Romantic love or sexual love. A love of spouses. Love of those trying to become spouses. Yes. Others, yes. Agape, right? The ultimate form of love, the divine form of love, selfless, self-giving love. One more, the first type of love that we ever experience. Storge, yeah. Involves the family or basic affection. So then looking at and understanding how it is we can approach each of these types of love and any other type of love that may be possible. But to be able to do it, to be able to experience it, as it was meant to be, not to abuse it, not to twist it, because that's what sin does. The more that we reside and remain in sin, the more that we corrupt or pervert these loves or destroy them, to make it almost impossible to understand them, let alone to live them out as they are meant to be. So, in looking at these matters, and applying ourselves to understanding these matters, we are applying ourselves to reappreciating the fullness of what the human person is. Which begins with its component parts, it being a body. So as we will see, seeing how it is, that being what we are is something that is good. Being the composition of body and soul is something that is good. It is not a prison, or it is not something that is extracted too much from the merely physical. And we are, as human beings, both body and soul. What that means, what those implications are, we'll see as we go on. Well, then how is it that this body is used? Is it used just as a tool, or is it used as a part of who we are? Is it no different than our computers or our desks? Or is it something more constitutive of who and what we are. And then applying it to these various types of love. The basic love of the family, the love of friendship, the love that seems to be the only type of love anymore, eros, romantic or sexual love. And then selfless and self-giving love, that is agape. With these understandings, to apply these ideas to many of those basic principles or issues that we see in our own day. What are many of those issues? What are some of those issues that might be applicable under these ideas? What do you think? Any ideas that come forward? A basic understanding of what is marriage? Is marriage something necessary or constitutive to the human person, to the human community? Does God have a plan, a meaning, a purpose for marriage? Is it something equal to or more or less than what animals do? Animals have bodies too, right? So are we just doing something similar or something more or something different or something less? Every species is concerned with propagation, right? Wants to keep itself going. Is that all that we do? Is that all marriage is for? Or is there something more going on there? Questions about an understanding of gender, which has become a very pressing concern in recent times. What does gender mean? Is gender something that is more than the body or different than the body? Is there the possibility of there being multiple or different types of gender than what has traditionally been defined? Is gender different than sex? Sometimes the old term. What's your sex? What's your gender? Is there a difference between the two? Is there a correspondence between the two? Is there nothing at all the same between the two? Obviously, reflecting off of that, the overall question of sexuality. What does it mean for us to experience or understand what is sexuality? Is it something that is only tied to marriage? Is there something more to it? Is it something necessary, fully necessary to the human person? Could it even be renounced, given up? How is it that how is it that the weakness of the human flesh affects all of these areas and other areas? What is it that is the divine standard? Is that knowable? Is that understandable? Or is it merely just something that I desire or experience and then define for myself? These are some of the major issues or questions that arise in these types of matters. Looking at these things. Why? Because many of them affect us at our core. While much of what we have talked about in the sense of the virtues has a very personal angle to us, it is more often than not something that is reflective of what I do. I need to do justice. I need to do temperance. I need to do prudence, fortitude. I need to do faith, hope, and love. These, on the other hand, look more at what I am, what I identify as. We often think morality is merely concerned with actions. And there is truth to that. We do reflect on actions. We have to reflect on actions. No doubt. But at the same time, we must also understand who we are meant to be, which is more than just my actions. The human person is more than the summation of their actions. The human person is more than the summation of their actions in Catholic morality. So it is then we need to go from the exterior, as it were, to kind of begin to go more into the interior. To flesh it out a bit. No pun intended. To flesh out and understand for ourselves what I am meant for, what I am oriented for, in order to orient everything else that I do. And so understanding and appreciating what I am as a physical being, a corporeal being, what that implies and what that means helps me to understand that. And obviously, more so than just the big picture beliefs that we looked at. Those are a part of it as well. Those are a major part of it. What the Christian story tells us. But at the same time, understanding and then living out what I am. So that I can become who I am. We start from the what so that we get to the who. So to look at these matters that especially in these days, are some of the most sensitive issues. More so than many of the things that we've looked at up to this point. Why? Because most of these affect our identity, our understanding of ourselves. Questions of gender, questions of sexuality, truly do reflect on the understanding of who we are, though they are not the summation of who we are. as we will see. Now, obviously, in these matters, we are looking at and understanding them ultimately through the lens, the prism of the Catholic faith, of what we believe has been revealed by God, or understood as from God's revelation, deducted from that, concerning all these matters. As I said at the beginning of the semester, you do not have to believe these things to pass this class. You need to understand them to understand where, especially, the Catholic understanding of all of these things. I cannot make you believe them to pass this class. If you have issues or if you have concerns with anything that I talk about, you are more than welcome to talk with me about it. You want clarification or whatnot. I very much understand these are very personal matters because they absolutely are. Because rightly so, they get at some of who we are as a human person. Hence why it is people are very sensitive about it anymore, understandably so. But none of any of these things that we talk about, that we go over, none of these are meant to be personal attack. It is meant to be an understanding of what are the Catholic positions concerning this. Where do they come from? How do they exist? You all are legally adults. Hopefully you are emotionally adults. You disagree with it? Fine. As long as you understand it, all I can do is present it to you. You do what you do with it. You think it's all poppycock and just want to throw it out? Fine. But at least come to understand it. We are called as truth seekers to look at all angles, all perspectives, to find the truth. Because it's all there. It's all deductible, or at least coming from principles, we believe. Because it's ultimately objective. It's beyond ourselves. Otherwise, how can we define anything? So we begin, in the next class, we begin by looking at, beginning to see what happens in the establishment of the human person. Humanity being created, being put on this earth, put in this creation. What is it that humanity is meant to be and to do originally? That will be our focus. That will be our topic for the next few classes. For now, comments, questions, thoughts? Well, then how about I give you a St. Patty's Day present just a few minutes early? There you go. The very little Irish in me comes out. So, for next class, we're going to start reading that Called to Love by Anderson and Granados, I think. Granados. So read chapter 1. Read the introduction in chapter 1 from Called to Love. Also read the very first book, the very first chapter of Genesis. To begin to understand, where the human person fits in all of this and what is it they are oriented towards. So look that up, begin that, and read up on that for next class. We'll see you then.